Right now, somewhere in the world, a decision is being made that will affect your life. You will never hear about it. You will never be asked. And the person making it was never elected by anyone. $300 billion moved through the global financial system in the last 60 seconds. Not today, not this hour, the last 60 seconds. And nobody told you, nobody warned you, nobody even thought you deserved to know. What if the system controlling your salary, your rent, the price of your food, the future of your children was designed by a small group of men in a hotel room over one weekend? What if the rules of that system have never once been voted on, never been debated in public, never been explained to the billions of people whose lives they shape every single day? What if that system is cracking right now, today, and what replaces it will determine the fate of every nation on earth for the next 100 years? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never look at money the same way again. We are taught from childhood that money is simple. You work, you earn, you spend, you save, clean, logical, safe. But that story, the one they gave you in school, in textbooks, in the news, that story is a cover. Underneath it is a machinery so vast, so complex, and so deliberately kept out of plain sight that even most economists struggle to describe it clearly. Today, we follow the money all the way to the top. No jargon, no textbook, just the truth. July 1944. World War II is still happening. Bodies are still being counted. Cities are still burning. But 50 men from 50 nations are sitting in a small hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And they are not talking about the war. They are talking about what comes after. They are designing the world. Over 3 weeks, behind closed doors, with no cameras and no public and no vote, they create 2 institutions that will come to dominate the global economy for the next 80 years. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and they make one decision above all others that changes everything. They put the US dollar at the center of the entire global financial system. Every country's currency tied to the dollar, every dollar backed by gold. America as the anchor, the foundation, the guarantee. The world accepts. Of course, it accepts. America has just won the war. America is producing half the world's manufacturing output. America has the gold. America has the guns. 50 nations, 1 hotel, 1 weekend, no election, no debate, 1 system. That system, with some modifications, is still running today, and it is running your life whether you know it or not. But before we go any further, we need to talk about something that most people get completely wrong. Something so fundamental that once you understand it, the entire world looks different. We need to talk about what money actually is. You probably think money is real, physical, backed by something solid, something in a vault somewhere, something that exists before you borrow it. You are wrong. And this is not an opinion. This is how the system works. When you deposit $100 into a bank, the bank does not keep your $100. It keeps 10. And it immediately lends out 90 to someone else. That 90 lands in another bank, which keeps 9 and lends out 81. That 81 lands in another bank, around and around through dozens of banks, until your original $100 has legally, mathematically, and quite deliberately become over $1,000 circulating in the economy. Your money multiplied without your knowledge, without your permission. This is called fractional reserve banking. It has been the engine of the global economy for over 300 years. But here is the part that truly breaks everything open. Banks do not just multiply existing money, they create entirely new money from nothing. When a bank approves your mortgage, it does not retrieve money from a vault. It does not use someone else's savings. It types a number into a computer. That number becomes real. That number is now money. It did not exist before that moment. The bank created it at the instant of your approval. Money is not found. It is not mined. It is not printed in a factory somewhere and carefully counted out. Money is created by debt, by a promise, by a bank saying, we believe you will pay this back, and therefore this number on our screen is now real. Now multiply that across 25,000 commercial banks globally, Add 9 major central banks setting the rules and the rates. Add $7 trillion traded in currencies alone every single day. And sitting above all of it, in a quiet glass building in Basel, Switzerland, is an institution that almost nobody outside high finance even knows exists. The Bank for International Settlements, founded in 1930, accountable to no government on earth. No parliament oversees it. No election determines its leadership. When the governors of the world's most powerful central banks need to coordinate quietly, away from cameras and press releases and democratic accountability, this is where they go. The central bank of central banks, writing the rules that all other banks follow in almost complete silence. Now let us make this human, because so far this has been architecture, systems, buildings. Let us talk about what this system actually does to people. Real people. People with names and faces and families who had no idea what was coming for them. Greece, 2010. But to understand what happened in 2010, you have to understand what came before it. You have to go back further, because this did not happen suddenly. It never does. For decades, the Greek government borrowed from German banks, from French banks, from European institutions who were only too happy to lend. They borrowed to build hospitals and highways and the gleaming Olympic stadiums that the whole world admired in 2004. They borrowed to fund public sector wages, pensions, social services, the architecture of a modern state, and the lenders never worried. Greece was a European country. Greece was in the Eurozone. Greece was, on paper, backed by the weight and stability of the entire European project. The loans kept coming, the interest rates stayed low, and nobody, not the Greek government, not the European banks, not the international ratings agencies that were supposed to be watching, nobody said stop. Then 2008 happened, the global financial crisis, and everything that had been hidden came roaring into the light. Suddenly, investors looked at Greece and saw what had always been there. A government that owed far more than it could ever repay, debt that had been quietly growing for years behind optimistic projections and creative accounting. The confidence evaporated overnight. Interest rates on Greek debt spiked. The cost of borrowing exploded, and the Greek government found itself in a hole so deep, so dark, so perfectly vertical that there was no climbing out. The bill came due. Greece could not pay. Enter the IMF. The International Monetary Fund does not arrive in a struggling country with sympathy. It does not arrive with grief for what is about to happen. It arrives the way a landlord arrives after 3 months of missed rent, with patience, with paperwork, and with conditions. Always conditions. The IMF, together with the European Commission and the European Central Bank, a group that journalists began calling the Troika, presented Greece with a choice that was not really a choice. Accept our terms or face complete financial collapse. And the terms were brutal. Cut pensions, not trim them, cut them. Some pensioners saw their income fall by 40% overnight. Fire government workers, tens of thousands of them. Privatize public assets, the water system, the electricity grid, the ports. Sell them to foreign investors at prices set not by Greeks but by the creditors. Open the economy to international competition in ways that destroyed domestic industries that could not compete. These demands were called structural adjustment programs or austerity measures. That word austerity sounds almost noble, almost rational, like the responsible thing, like doing what adults must do when the money runs out. It is not noble. It is not rational, and the money did not simply run out, it was systematically extracted. Greek unemployment hit 27%, not in a war, not in a famine, not in the aftermath of a natural disaster, in a modern European country in the 21st century. Youth unemployment hit 60%. 60. 6 out of every 10 young Greeks who wanted to work could not find work. An entire generation, educated, trained, ready, simply had nowhere to go. Hospitals ran out of basic medicine, not rare medicine, basic medicine. Patients were told to bring their own surgical gloves to operations, their own gauze, their own syringes. Schools ran out of textbooks. Teachers photocopied pages from books they owned personally and passed them around classrooms. Heating systems in public buildings were turned off because there was no money for fuel. Children sat in cold classrooms in winter and tried to learn. Suicide rates in Greece doubled in the years following the bailout. Doubled. The total size of the Greek economy shrank by 25% over 5 years. To understand what that means, consider this. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, the worst economic catastrophe in modern American history, the US economy shrank by about 27%. Greece suffered a depression-level economic collapse in peacetime in Europe in the 21st century. And now, the part they never put in the headlines. The part that makes you sit back and stare at the wall after all of that, after all the suffering. After pensioners lost half their income, and young people lost their futures, and hospitals ran dry, and suicide rates doubled, after an entire generation of Greeks paid with everything they had, where did the bailout money go? It did not go to Greek hospitals. It did not go to Greek schools. It did not go to Greek families who had lost their savings and their jobs and their dignity. It went straight back to the banks, the European banks, the German banks, the French banks, the same institutions that had lent recklessly for years and then panicked and demanded to be rescued. The Greek people paid the price. The banks were made whole. And at the end of it all, Greece still owed most of the original debt. Because the bailout loans did not cancel the debt, they restructured it, which meant Greece would be paying for decades, which meant the suffering was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a much longer one. This is not a Greek story. Argentina, Zambia, Pakistan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Mexico, Jamaica, Ecuador, Bolivia, the Ivory Coast, the same script, different actors, different decades, different currencies. A country borrows, conditions are attached, wealth flows upward, the people at the bottom pay the price, the debt moves, it never dies, it just moves. Now here is where it gets darker, because there is a layer above all of this that most people never see. Every single day, the global foreign exchange market processes over $7 trillion in transactions. 7 trillion per day, more than the entire annual economic output of Japan traded in 24 hours. This market has no building, no floor, no opening bell. It is a vast, invisible web of transactions between banks and hedge funds and corporations and governments happening in microseconds around the clock in every time zone simultaneously. And controlling the flow of all that money more than any other single force is one thing. The interest rate set by the United States Federal Reserve, when the Fed raises rates, the return on holding dollars goes up. Investors everywhere, in Brazil, in Turkey, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Indonesia, pull their money out and move it to dollar assets for better returns. Those countries' currencies weaken almost immediately, sometimes in hours, sometimes in minutes. Imports get more expensive, food gets more expensive, inflation surges, and the central banks of those countries face an impossible choice. They can let their currency fall and watch inflation destroy the purchasing power of every ordinary person in their country. Or they can raise their own interest rates to attract capital back, which slows their economy, increases unemployment, and damages growth. There is no good option. There is only less bad. All because of one decision made in a committee room in Washington, D.C. by 12 people who were never elected to govern Brazil or Nigeria or Turkey or Indonesia. By people who are legally, institutionally, deliberately focused only on the American economy when they make their decision. The Federal Reserve's mandate is price stability and full employment in the United States, not in Lagos, not in Istanbul, not in Jakarta. The consequences of their decisions in those cities are, in the most literal legal sense, not their problem. And yet those consequences are enormous. A 2023 study found that a single percentage point increase in US interest rates reduces economic output in emerging market economies by an average of nearly 1% over 3 years. Multiply that across dozens of countries. Multiply it across decades of rate cycles. The human cost is staggering, but it is invisible because it does not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, in 1,000 small ways. A family that cannot afford school fees because the local currency fell. A small business that cannot survive because import costs tripled. A government that cannot build a hospital because its debt repayments consume the budget. Invisible suffering. Statistically real, humanly enormous. This is the true power of the dollar. the world's reserve currency since 1944, the language of global trade, the currency in which oil is priced, in which most international debt is written, the currency every central bank on earth must hold in its vaults just to conduct normal international transactions. Which means the United States has a power that no empire in human history has ever possessed in quite this form. Not the power of armies, though America has those too, the power to print the world's money, the power to set the price of global trade, the power to reshape the economic lives of billions of people who have no vote, no voice, and no recourse, the power to decide through purely domestic monetary decisions what a loaf of bread costs in a country on the other side of the planet. Economists call it the exorbitant privilege. And for 80 years, almost nobody seriously challenged it. The dollar was not just a currency, it was infrastructure, it was the air that the global economy breathed. Questioning it felt like questioning gravity, until it didn't. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. The Western response is swift. Sanctions, exclusion from SWIFT, the global messaging network that moves money between banks, and then something that had never been done before in modern history. $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves, money held in Western banks in Western currencies, frozen, gone, overnight. And in every finance ministry in Beijing and Riyadh and New Delhi and Pretoria, officials read that news very carefully because the message was not subtle. If you keep your savings in the dollar system, we can take them. The shift began almost immediately. China accelerated its push to price oil trades in yuan. Saudi Arabia opened negotiations on yuan-denominated oil sales for the first time. Brazil and China announced they would conduct bilateral trade directly in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. And BRICS, the bloc that began as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, expanded to 10 nations and placed the question of a new reserve currency directly on the table at their 2023 Johannesburg summit. Not the dollar, not the euro, something new, something that no single country controls. The conversation that was unthinkable in 2020 was being spoken aloud by leaders representing nearly half the world's population in 2023. Why should global trade be priced in one country's currency? Why should one nation's domestic monetary policy determine the economic fate of billions of people who never voted for it? These are not radical questions. They are obvious questions. The only remarkable thing is that it took 80 years for them to be asked this loudly. The dollar system is not finished. Its depth and reach and institutional weight are still enormous. But for the first time since a hotel in New Hampshire in 1944, it is being seriously questioned by serious people with serious alternatives. And now we come to the part of this story that matters most. The part that is about you, not Greece, not Russia, not the Bank for International Settlements, you. Because I'm not going to stand here and tell you this story has a clean ending. It does not. The system we have described today works for some people, for some countries, for some banks. For the woman pressing her hand against the locked glass door of a bank in Athens in 2010, it did not work. For the farmer in Zambia watching the price of his harvest collapse because of an interest rate decision made in a city he will never visit, it did not work. For the young Greek doctor who spent 6 years training and then left the country because there was simply nothing left for her, it did not work. But here is what I keep returning to. This system was built by people, not by fate, not by nature, not by forces beyond human control, by people, specific people, with names, with agendas, with flaws. In a hotel in New Hampshire over 3 weeks, in the summer of 1944, and anything built by people can be changed by people. The next global financial architecture is not a distant theoretical possibility. It is being constructed right now. Digital currencies issued by central banks, new multilateral institutions built outside the dollar framework, trade agreements that bypass Western financial infrastructure entirely, decentralized technologies that no government controls, all of it moving forward simultaneously. The world being redesigned again, and this time, unlike 1000 944. The conversation is not happening behind closed doors in one hotel. It is happening everywhere, including here. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is who shapes it. In 1944, 50 men in a hotel shaped it for 8 decades. They made decisions that affected every person on earth without asking a single one of them. The people who understand this moment, who can see through the abstraction, who can follow the money and ask the hard questions and refuse the comfortable stories, those people will have a voice in what comes next. That used to require a seat at a table in Basel. It does not anymore. $300 billion still moving. Right now, the question is not where it is going. The question is whether you are going to keep letting it move without you.